For generations, the Sinclair and Whitmore families had been sworn rivals in the business world. The Sinclairs controlled the luxury hotel and resort industry, owning the most prestigious brands across Europe and America, catering exclusively to the elite and the world's most powerful billionaires. Their hotels were not merely places of accommodation, but symbols of status and sophistication. Meanwhile, the Whitmores had built a formidable real estate empire, possessing some of the most valuable land assets globally, with towering skyscrapers, high-end urban developments, and commercial centers under their name. The rivalry between these two powerhouses had always been fierce, often resorting to ruthless business tactics to undermine each other. But this time, a billion-dollar opportunity had emerged, one that could shift the balance of power for both families. It was an exclusive luxury resort on a private island, a paradise designed for the ultra-rich. Securing this contract meant everything, and both families were willing to go to war for it. However, neither could claim complete control on their own. The Whitmores owned the land and the island, but they lacked the expertise and infrastructure to manage a world-class luxury resort. On the other hand, the Sinclairs had unparalleled experience in operating elite hotels, but lacked ownership of the land necessary for the project. Both families understood that if they continued to fight, they would only pave the way for a third party to swoop in and seize the deal. Neither side could overpower the other, and the only viable solution to secure their mutual interest was an alliance. But the real problem was trust. The Sinclairs and Whitmores had been adversaries for too long, and a mere business contract wouldn't be enough to bind them together. How could they guarantee that once the agreement was signed, one side wouldn't find a way to manipulate the situation and take full control? Amidst the tense negotiations, the family heads made a bold decision. They needed a bond stronger than any contract. They needed an unbreakable tie, one that would make betrayal impossible. And the only way to ensure that was through marriage between the heirs of both families. Once married, they would become family, and no one would betray their own. The decision was made swiftly, leaving no room for objections. Sebastian Whitmore, the heir to the Whitmore Empire, would marry Charlotte Sinclair, the only daughter of the Sinclair dynasty. A marriage not for love, but for power, wealth, and strategic advantage. Sebastian Whitmore, the young yet ruthless CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, had no say in the matter. When his father announced the engagement, he was furious, but his father's words left him no room to argue. If you refuse, the Sinclairs will find another partner, and when that happens, you will lose control of your own company. Sebastian knew his father well. This was not a threat, it was a fact. If he refused, his father could immediately transfer control of the company to someone else, perhaps one of his uncles or an unpredictable investor. His entire career, everything he had built, would be gone in an instant. Sebastian had never believed in love, nor had he ever considered marriage. He had no time for something as trivial as romance, let alone marrying a woman he had never met. But he had no choice. Charlotte Sinclair wasn't any luckier. When her father informed her that she was to marry Sebastian, she fiercely protested. But her father's response made it clear that she had no say in the matter. If you don't marry Sebastian, you will marry someone of my choosing, and I assure you, that man won't let you live comfortably. Charlotte had never believed in arranged marriages. She knew she was just a pawn in the family's grand scheme. If she refused to marry Sebastian, her father would marry her off to some older businessman in exchange for another lucrative deal. A cold yet competent CEO like Sebastian Whitmore was, at the very least, a better option. But unlike Sebastian, Charlotte did not see this as a tragedy. She was not someone who would silently accept her fate. If she had to marry Sebastian, she would ensure this marriage unfolded on her terms. She wouldn't let him control the game alone. Sebastian assumed she was nothing more than a pampered heiress. She would prove him wrong. If he was cold, she would ensure their marriage was anything but dull. Their first meeting was nothing short of a negotiation. They agreed to sign a marriage contract with 3 conditions. The marriage would last only 1 year, there would be no emotions involved, and they would not interfere in each other's lives. Sebastian made no effort to hide his disdain when he first saw Charlotte. He looked her up and down as if assessing a product, then scoffed. "So this is my future wife? A spoiled little princess living off her father's wealth? Charlotte was unfazed. She raised an eyebrow and smirked defiantly. And you're no better. A workaholic CEO with zero personality. I bet your life is so boring, it's almost pitiful. Her words made Sebastian's eyes narrow. This was not the reaction he had expected. He thought she would be outraged, or at least offended. But no. She simply looked at him as if considering an intriguing challenge. Their wedding was a grand spectacle, lavish beyond imagination, attended by the media and high society's most powerful figures. But no matter how dazzling it appeared, the ceremony was nothing more than an elaborate performance. When the priest asked Sebastian if he would take Charlotte as his wife, he turned to her, his voice low but firm. Don't expect me to love you. I never will. Charlotte didn't flinch. Instead, she arched an eyebrow and smirked. Perfect, because I have no intention of loving you either. They walked out of the ceremony hand in hand, the perfect couple in the eyes of the world. But behind the flashing cameras and congratulatory speeches, they were nothing more than strangers, bound together by power and ambition. They had assumed their marriage would be a dull, uneventful arrangement for a year, but neither of them knew just how much it would change their lives forever. Life can be overwhelming, but here, we share heartfelt tales to bring you peace, joy, and inspiration. Your support, every comment, like, and follow, means the world to us. It motivates us to create more meaningful and uplifting stories just for you. Did our latest story touch your heart? Leave a yes in the comments if you agree. Subscribe now and be part of a community that spreads love, kindness, and positivity. Let's make every day a little brighter, together. From the very first day Charlotte stepped into Sebastian Whitmore's mansion, she realized that this marriage would be anything but easy. Not because she couldn't live with a stranger, but because Sebastian deliberately ignored her existence entirely. Sebastian was a man of ice, cold, ruthless, and disciplined to perfection. After the wedding, he made no effort to acknowledge Charlotte, treating her like a mere decorative object, a necessary condition for securing the business alliance between their two families. She noticed it within the first week. Every morning when she came downstairs for breakfast, he was already gone. When she went to bed, he was still locked in his office, working late into the night. Even when they were in the same room, he didn't utter a single word, merely glancing at her with indifferent eyes as if she didn't exist. But Charlotte was not the type of woman to sit quietly and endure. If Sebastian thought she would live like a lifeless statue, he was gravely mistaken. Charlotte detested boredom, and if Sebastian wanted to treat her like a stranger, she would ensure he could never ignore her again. Charlotte was not one to accept being overlooked in her own marriage. If Sebastian decided to ignore her, she would make sure he could never forget her presence. She wasn't weak, nor was she a docile woman willing to fade into the background. If this marriage was merely a contract, then she would make it interesting in her own way. Sebastian Whitmore had one immutable habit. Every morning, he drank a cup of unsweetened black espresso, brewed to his precise preference. Charlotte knew that. Early one morning before Sebastian entered the kitchen, she had the household staff replace every coffee bean in the house with something special. When he took his first sip, his brows immediately furrowed. A second later, he slammed the cup down onto the table, his gaze darkening. Charlotte. His voice dropped several degrees. She sat down across from him, casually biting into a croissant, her tone light. What's wrong, dear husband? Sebastian stared at her, as if restraining the urge to snap. What did you do to my coffee? Charlotte feigned surprise. Oh, you mean the new blend? I thought we should try something healthier. Your espresso is far too bitter, not good for your mood. So I switched it to almond milk coffee, caffeine-free with a hint of vanilla syrup. Delicious, isn't it? Sebastian looked at her as if she had just committed an unforgivable crime. You? His grip tightened around the cup before he set it down again. Charlotte, do you know what I hate most? She tilted her head, raising an amused brow. Let me guess. Having your perfectly structured life disrupted? Sebastian stood up and left the table without another word. Charlotte knew he would go make himself another coffee. but she had already arranged for all the coffee beans in the house to be swapped out. She sat there waiting. Exactly 10 minutes later, Sebastian returned, his face set in stone, his eyes colder than ice. "What did you do to my coffee?" Charlotte shrugged. "Looks like you'll have to get used to change." Sebastian clenched his jaw but said nothing. Instead, he took out his phone and sent a message. 3 minutes later, his personal assistant walked in, carrying a freshly brewed cup of espresso from Sebastian's favorite cafe. He took a sip and then looked at Charlotte with a smug, challenging expression. Charlotte simply smiled. She enjoyed this game. Sebastian despised phone calls interrupting him, which was why he always kept his phone on vibrate during important meetings. But Charlotte knew something that would annoy him even more, a ringtone he could never ignore. One morning while he was in the shower, she secretly changed his ringtone to "I Will Always Love You" by Whitney Houston. 2 days later, during a tense board meeting, the conference room was so silent that one could hear a pin drop. Sebastian was presenting a new strategic plan, his voice deep, authoritative. All eyes were on him. Then suddenly, "And I will always love you!" Every head turned in shock. Sebastian froze. His phone vibrated on the conference table, Whitney Houston's iconic voice soaring through the air. Several board members exchanged glances. Some attempted to stifle their laughter, but their twitching lips betrayed them. Sebastian slowly turned his head, his gaze darkening when he saw the message flashing on his screen. "Charlotte, a little romance won't kill you, dear husband." Sebastian picked up his phone, turned it off in one swift motion, then inhaled deeply to regain his composure. "Continue." His voice was eerily calm, but Charlotte knew. Inside, he was absolutely seething. Sebastian despised public displays of affection, but for Charlotte, that only made it more of a challenge. One evening at an exclusive charity gala for the elite, Sebastian brought Charlotte along, fulfilling his marital obligations. As usual, he maintained his cold, detached demeanor, standing beside her without a hint of warmth. Charlotte, however, was the opposite. She mingled effortlessly, smiling and engaging in conversations as if the event were her own. Then a strikingly beautiful young businesswoman approached them, her eyes gleaming with intrigue as she looked at Sebastian. "Mr. Whitmore, I didn't know you were married." She smiled flirtatiously. Sebastian merely gave a curt nod, clearly uninterested in small talk. But Charlotte saw an opportunity. She stepped forward, intertwining her fingers with Sebastian's and gazing up at him with eyes full of affection. "Darling, aren't you going to introduce me?" Her voice was saccharine sweet, dangerously so. Sebastian shot her a warning glance before turning back to the woman. He squeezed Charlotte's hand lightly, his way of telling her to behave. "This is Charlotte," he said, his tone as impassive as ever. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Aren't you forgetting something?" Sebastian frowned. "Forgetting what?" Charlotte's lips curled into a mischievous smile. "The way you call me at home." Sebastian instantly understood what she was doing. His grip on her hand tightened in silent warning, but she wasn't letting him off the hook. The room fell silent. Everyone around them waited for his response. He clenched his jaw, his deep voice dropping to an almost menacing whisper. "Baby." Charlotte beamed. "Good boy." The woman chuckled, shaking her head before excusing herself, leaving Sebastian exhaling sharply in frustration. "You will pay for this," he murmured darkly. Charlotte leaned in, her voice teasing. "I'm waiting." She didn't need Sebastian to love her, but if he thought he could ignore her, he was sorely mistaken. At first, Sebastian had dismissed Charlotte as nothing more than a spoiled heiress with no value beyond the Sinclair name. But living under the same roof with her was beginning to change his perception. Sebastian had never taken Charlotte seriously when it came to business. Initially, he had no intention of involving her in any corporate discussions, but since their marriage was a crucial part of the partnership between their families, the Sinclairs insisted she be present for key negotiations. He assumed she would be nothing but a decorative accessory, or worse, an entitled princess seeking validation. But during a high-stakes investment meeting between the two corporations, Charlotte did something that made him see her in a new light. A major business partner was presenting a financial clause regarding hotel asset management. It was a complicated agreement that required Whitmore Enterprises to share a portion of its profits with a subsidiary to maintain financial stability. The firm's legal team had reviewed the contract and no one had raised any objections. Sebastian listened in silence, arms crossed, until an unexpected voice cut through the room. "Hold on!" Charlotte. The conference room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. She flipped through the contract, then placed it on the table, tapping a specific clause with her finger. According to this provision, if the subsidiary experiences financial trouble, Whitmore Enterprises will be responsible for covering the losses. In other words, you're shifting all the financial risk onto us. The room remained still. The opposing firm's lawyer hesitated for a fraction of a second. Sebastian turned to look at Charlotte, a flicker of surprise in his otherwise unreadable gaze. Charlotte continued, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "This is not a fair deal. If you want to share the profits, then why should Whitmore carry all the financial risks? If you can propose a more balanced agreement, we'll consider it. If not, we'll find another partner." The executives on the other side were visibly caught off guard. Sebastian, however, was coming to a realization. Charlotte Sinclair was not just here to play a role. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was persuasive, convincing an investor with just a simple conversation. Sebastian had always been the one handling major investors, but during a business gala, one of the most crucial investors in their project, Robert Haynes, seemed hesitant about continuing his partnership with Whitmore. Haynes was a tough negotiator, someone who demanded absolute guarantees of profit before committing his capital. He wasn't easily swayed by dry financial projections. Sebastian had spent the evening trying to reason with him, using logical financial arguments, but Haynes remained unconvinced. Then Charlotte, who had been casually sipping her wine in the background, stepped forward with a gentle smile. "Mr. Haynes, may I ask you a question?" Haynes glanced at her, slightly intrigued. "Of course." Charlotte tilted her head, her tone calm and composed. "How many projects have you invested in over your career?" Haynes chuckled. "More than 30. "And which one do you regret the most?" Haynes hesitated slightly. "A hotel project in France. We failed to recover our investment as planned." Charlotte nodded. "And why was that?" Haynes shrugged. "I bet on an incompetent management team." Charlotte smiled knowingly. "Then why are you hesitating over Whitmore? You're not betting on an inexperienced company. You're investing in one of the strongest hotel chains in the world, a system I've lived and worked in since I was a child." Haynes was silent for a second before suddenly bursting into laughter. "I like the way you think, Charlotte." A few days later, Haynes agreed to invest. Sebastian couldn't believe it. She had accomplished with one conversation what had taken him months of negotiations. She was clever, saving Sebastian from a scandal in a single night. Sebastian was always in control, but even he hadn't anticipated falling into a carefully orchestrated trap set by his rivals. A rumor leaked, a tabloid article accusing him of financial misconduct, suggesting that he had been involved in stock price manipulation. The news was completely false, but if it spread unchecked, it could severely damage Whitmore's reputation. Sebastian was already strategizing his next move when Charlotte walked in and handed him an iPad. "I just sent you a draft of an article," she said. Frowning, he opened it. The headline read, "The plot to sabotage Whitmore Enterprises. Who's really behind it?" Sebastian glanced at her. "What is this?" She casually shrugged. "Do you know who orchestrated this smear campaign?" Sebastian's eyes darkened. "Mitchell's company." Charlotte nodded. "Then instead of letting the media control the narrative, why don't we release the first blow? Expose this as a fabricated attack before it spirals out of control?" Sebastian looked back at the article she had drafted. Each word was meticulously crafted, turning the scandal against their rival in the most strategic way. She had flipped the entire situation overnight. Sebastian was beginning to realize that Charlotte was not just a contractual wife. She was a partner, a woman he could no longer underestimate. For the first time, Sebastian found himself truly paying attention to her. Sebastian Whitmore had never been a man who easily changed his mind about someone. He had always trusted his instincts, and from the beginning, his instincts had told him that Charlotte Sinclair was nothing more than a spoiled heiress, a pawn in the Sinclair family's grand scheme. He had no time for women like her, nor did he care about her beyond the necessity of maintaining their marriage as part of their business arrangement. But day by day, Charlotte was breaking down those assumptions. She wasn't just mischievous. She was intelligent, sharp, and undeniably capable. She knew how to turn situations in her favor, how to hold her own in conversations with powerful men without ever appearing weak. And most of all, she wasn't afraid of him. At first, he thought it was just curiosity, an interest in a woman who was nothing like he had expected. But soon he realized he was drawn to her in a way he hadn't anticipated. Tonight marked one of the most significant business events of the year, an exclusive auction attended by the world's most powerful corporations. This was more than just a bidding war. It was a battlefield of influence, where titans of industry competed for lucrative deals. Whitmore Enterprises was set to bid on a prime commercial property in New York, and Sebastian's presence was crucial. Naturally, accompanying him was Charlotte Sinclair, his wife in name only. Sebastian expected nothing from Charlotte. If anything, he had mentally prepared himself for her usual antics or for her to grow bored halfway through the event. But the moment he stepped out of the car and his eyes landed on Charlotte in a sleek, form-fitting red gown, he was caught entirely off guard. She was breathtaking, so stunning that heads turned in admiration. The dress accentuated every perfect curve, her hair styled in an elegant updo that still held a hint of wildness, and her brown eyes sparkled with amusement, as if she was enjoying this more than anyone else. Sebastian couldn't look away. This wasn't the playful, mischievous Charlotte he had come to know. This was a woman exuding power, allure, and confidence. A woman who could captivate any man in the room with just a glance. And he knew he wasn't the only one who noticed. Sebastian was used to being the center of attention at events like this. But tonight, he wasn't. Tonight, Charlotte was the one drawing all the eyes in the room. And he didn't like it. Throughout the evening, men approached her, talking to her, complimenting her, and Charlotte handled it with effortless grace, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. But what truly set Sebastian on edge was when Marcus Layton took an interest in her. Marcus was a well-known billionaire, slightly older than Sebastian, running a luxury hotel empire of his own. A seasoned businessman, but also infamous for his habit of pursuing beautiful women. And tonight, he had set his sights on Charlotte. Sebastian didn't catch every word of their conversation, but he saw the way Marcus leaned in, whispering something in Charlotte's ear. He saw the knowing smile Marcus gave her. He saw the way Charlotte laughed, soft, effortless, without pulling away. An unfamiliar, unwelcome feeling surged within him. He didn't like this. He didn't like the way Marcus looked at her. He didn't like the way she smiled at him so easily. And before he even realized what he was doing, he was already moving. In one swift motion, before either of them could react, he slid an arm around Charlotte's waist and pulled her close. She barely had time to register what was happening. Marcus, too, looked surprised, but he quickly masked it with a knowing smirk. "Sebastian, you have perfect timing," Marcus mused, raising an eyebrow. "Charlotte and I were having a rather interesting conversation." Sebastian didn't smile. His gaze was ice cold, sharp enough to cut through steel. His voice was low, slow, and carried a deadly edge. "She's my wife." The atmosphere shifted instantly. People around them began to take notice, sensing the sudden tension. But Sebastian didn't care. His entire focus was on Marcus, daring him to challenge what he had just said. Marcus smirked, unfazed. "Is that so? I was under the impression this was merely a business arrangement." Sebastian's grip on Charlotte's waist tightened just slightly, enough for her to feel the heat of his body, the tension coiled beneath his composed exterior. "Don't test your luck, Marcus." For the first time that evening, Charlotte looked at Sebastian differently. He didn't realize what he was doing. He didn't realize he was acting on instinct. He didn't realize he was jealous. But Charlotte did, and it delighted her. "Come on now, no need for things to get tense," Charlotte finally spoke, tilting her head with amusement. "Shouldn't we be enjoying the party?" Sebastian stared at her, as if trying to decipher something. But in the end, he only gave her waist one final squeeze before pulling her away from Marcus, leading her elsewhere. As they walked off, Charlotte leaned in, whispering teasingly near his ear. "Jealous, darling?" Sebastian didn't answer, and that's when he realized. His heart was pounding harder than usual. He didn't like the way Marcus had looked at Charlotte. He didn't like the way she had smiled at another man. He didn't like the idea of her belonging to anyone but him. Sebastian Whitmore, the man who had never allowed emotions to interfere with business, had finally come to a startling realization. He was jealous, and he couldn't deny it anymore. Charlotte had never believed in love at first sight. She believed in attraction, in fleeting emotions, in the psychological games between men and women. But love, that was something distant, almost unreal. And yet she could sense the shift in Sebastian. At first he had been cold, distant. He wouldn't even spare her more than 2 seconds of his attention. But with time, the way he looked at her began to change. He no longer ignored her. He started watching her more often. Sometimes she would catch him observing her from a distance, his gaze unreadable, and though he would never admit it, he no longer seemed bothered by her presence. Whenever she teased him, he no longer reacted with irritation. Instead, his eyes held something else: patience, perhaps even amusement. Charlotte knew this game well. She recognized the signs when a man began noticing a woman in a way he hadn't before. Sebastian Whitmore was starting to care about her. The way he subtly controlled himself when other men flirted with her said it all. He didn't hate her. In fact, he had feelings for her, but he was too proud to admit it. Everything became clear when Charlotte fell ill. That morning, she woke up feeling utterly drained, as though she had run a marathon overnight. A splitting headache throbbed behind her eyes. Her throat felt raw, and her entire body burned with fever. Charlotte rarely got sick, but when she did, she preferred to handle it alone. She had no intention of bothering anyone, so she wrapped herself in blankets and decided to sleep through the fever. But Sebastian noticed. At first, he didn't think much of it. Then he realized she wasn't at breakfast. She didn't tease him, didn't pull any of her usual tricks, didn't linger in the kitchen like a mischievous cat. And that made him pause. Passing by her room, he knocked once. No response. Sebastian frowned. Charlotte never skipped breakfast. She had never been this quiet for so long. Without thinking, he pushed open the door, and instantly he knew something was wrong. Charlotte was curled up under the covers, her face paler than usual, her breathing shallow. When he stepped closer and pressed a hand to her forehead, the heat radiating from her skin made him freeze. She was burning up. Sebastian didn't hesitate. He immediately called for his private doctor, waited for the prescription, and then returned to her room. She hadn't woken up yet. Her breaths were weak, her brows furrowed in discomfort, and for some inexplicable reason, the sight of her like this unsettled him. He hated this feeling. He hated caring about her more than he should. Hated that seeing her unwell made him feel uneasy. But instead of walking away as he usually would, he did something he never thought he would do. Charlotte woke up to an unfamiliar sight. Her body ached with exhaustion, her throat burned, and even lifting a hand felt like a monumental effort. Her eyelids were heavy, but she could still make out the shadowy figure beside her. Sebastian. She blinked, her breath still weak. You ... Sebastian sat there watching her. There was no usual coldness in his eyes, no impatience, no irritation. He was simply there, waiting for her to wake up. Charlotte frowned slightly. He had never been this close before. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence, despite how icy he usually seemed. You're awake. His voice was deep, slightly husky. Charlotte narrowed her eyes at him, her voice hoarse. What are you doing here? Sebastian didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for a bowl of warm porridge sitting on the table. He stirred it gently, then lifted a spoonful to her lips. Eat. She stared at the steaming spoon, then back at him. Sebastian Whitmore was feeding her. She couldn't believe it. The same man who never showed concern for anyone, who kept the world at arm's length, was now sitting by her bed, patiently taking care of her. Despite her burning fever, Charlotte managed to smirk. Well, I never thought I'd see the day Sebastian Whitmore would take care of someone. Sebastian hesitated for just a second. Normally, he would fire back with a sharp retort or at least shoot her a glare. But this time he didn't. He simply looked at her, his deep eyes holding something she couldn't quite decipher. Eat, he repeated, his voice quieter. Charlotte bit her lip, then slowly opened her mouth and accepted the spoonful of porridge. The warmth spread through her, but what unsettled her more was the proximity between them. Sebastian was sitting so close that if she leaned in just a little, her nose would brush against his collar. She could smell his cologne, a rich, sophisticated scent laced with something undeniably masculine. Maybe it was the fever. Maybe it was the close proximity. But her heart suddenly skipped a beat. For the first time, she felt the full weight of Sebastian's presence, the quiet intensity he carried, the raw magnetism he exuded. She swallowed, though she wasn't sure if it was the porridge or the tension between them. Sebastian scooped another spoonful, still focused entirely on her. This wasn't something he was used to doing, yet he was doing it without hesitation. The air between them grew heavier. Their closeness felt unnatural, unfamiliar. Yet strangely, neither of them moved away. Charlotte's eyes lingered on him. Sebastian could have easily ordered the maids to take care of her. He could have called a doctor and left her alone, as he always did. But he didn't. He stayed. He had spent the entire day by her side, and now he was feeding her with his own hands. Charlotte didn't dare ask why. She was afraid that if she asked, he would deny it all. Afraid that if she acknowledged it, this rare moment would vanish. So she simply finished the porridge, quietly savoring the closeness between them. When the bowl was empty, Sebastian placed it back on the table and stood up. Sleep. You'll feel better tomorrow. His voice was still low, still calm, but there was an unspoken gentleness beneath it. Charlotte watched him walk out, and only when the door closed behind him did she finally let out a slow breath. She placed a hand over her chest, feeling the erratic thump of her heartbeat. She knew then. She had fallen for him, but she also knew Sebastian wasn't ready to admit his own feelings. Sebastian Whitmore would never allow himself to fall so easily. But Charlotte, she wasn't afraid to wait, because she knew that sooner or later, he wouldn't be able to deny it anymore. Sebastian Whitmore never thought he would stand on the brink of defeat. He was a man who did not accept failure. Since taking over as CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, he had elevated the company to new heights, making every competitor wary of his next move. But with just one misstep, everything he had built over the years was now crumbling before his eyes. The Middle East investment project, his ace, the gamble he had been certain would yield astronomical returns, had failed catastrophically. Political instability had frozen the project indefinitely, rendering all the capital he had funneled into it meaningless. Whitmore Enterprises' stock was plummeting, shareholders were losing faith, and partners were beginning to withdraw. But what made it worse was that Richard Whitmore, his uncle, had seized this opportunity to strike. Richard had been secretly working behind the scenes, manipulating the board, convincing shareholders that Sebastian was no longer fit to lead, that if he remained CEO, the company would be doomed. And the most painful part, his own father wasn't on his side. Useless. William Whitmore, the man who had once placed all his expectations on him, now looked at him with nothing but contempt. Sebastian had lost everything. A painful decision, ending his marriage with Charlotte. He could lose the company. He could lose his reputation. He could lose everything he had ever worked for. But the one thing he couldn't afford to lose was Charlotte. Sebastian knew he loved her, and because of that, he couldn't drag her into his downfall. If she stayed, she would have to endure the ridicule of high society, the instability of a crumbling empire, the loss of all the luxury she deserved. She deserved a better life. She deserved someone better, someone who wasn't a failure. He had made his decision. He would end this marriage before she could get hurt. The night everything fell apart. That evening, when Charlotte returned to the mansion, she sensed something was wrong immediately. Sebastian sat on the sofa, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes cold as if he had already made the most crucial decision of his life. She walked toward him, brows furrowing. "Are you okay?" Sebastian placed his glass down, his gaze meeting hers. "Sit down." His voice was deep, devoid of warmth. Charlotte hesitated but eventually pulled out a chair and sat across from him. And then he pushed a document toward her. She froze. It was a divorce paper. For a moment it felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her. Her eyes lifted to meet his, disbelief written all over her face. "What is this?" Sebastian's expression didn't change. His voice was ice. "Our marriage contract has run its course. There's no need to extend it." Charlotte couldn't believe what she was hearing. She knew their marriage had originally been a business arrangement. But after everything? "Sebastian," she said, her voice unsteady, "you weren't even going to discuss this with me first?" "There's nothing to discuss." He leaned back against the couch, his gaze sharp and distant. "We were never a real couple. It's time to end this." His words felt like knives slicing through her. Charlotte knew something was wrong. He was hiding something. "You're lying." She met his gaze, her voice steadier now. Sebastian smirked, a cold, cruel smirk. "Oh? You think I love you?" Charlotte clenched her fists. "You do." For the first time he hesitated, only for a fraction of a second, but she saw it. Then just as quickly, he buried it beneath his usual icy mask. "You're delusional, Charlotte." He stood, pouring himself another drink. "You think I care about you? We were just two strangers, forced into a marriage neither of us wanted. I never loved you. And now, I'm done with this game." Charlotte felt her heart tighten. She didn't believe him. She could see it in his eyes, the pain he was trying so hard to hide, the way he was pushing her away on purpose. "What if I don't sign?" she challenged. Sebastian set his glass down with more force than necessary, his jaw tightening. "Do you think I'd beg you to stay?" He took a step closer, towering over her, his voice dangerously low. "Do you think I need you so much that I would hold on?" Charlotte tilted her chin up defiantly, her hands clenched. If he didn't want her to leave, why was he saying all this? She wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to make him admit the truth. But she didn't. Because she knew, when someone has already decided to let go, there's nothing you can do to stop them. Charlotte took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "Fine." She reached for the pen, her hand trembling only slightly as she signed her name on the divorce papers. Without another word, she stood, walking toward the door. Sebastian didn't stop her. He just stood there watching her leave, watching the one woman he had ever loved walk out of his life. He thought he would feel relieved. Instead, he had never felt emptier. Charlotte walked away from the Whitmore mansion. Her steps felt impossibly heavy, her breath unsteady as if she had just escaped from a nightmare. But this wasn't a nightmare. This was reality. She had signed the divorce papers. Their marriage was officially over. Sebastian had pushed her away as if she had never mattered. She wanted to believe his words, that it had all been a contract, that he had never loved her, that she had been nothing but a pawn in his game. But she couldn't. If he truly didn't love her, then why had there been such pain in his eyes? If he truly didn't care, then why had his voice trembled when he told her to leave? If this had only been a contractual marriage, then why did it hurt so much? A sleepless night. That entire night, Charlotte couldn't sleep. She sat by the window staring out into the London skyline, watching the soft drizzle fall over the city. Cold, silent, endless. Sebastian's words echoed in her mind like a death sentence. "I never loved you. Do you think I need you enough to hold on?" But she didn't believe him. Sebastian Whitmore wasn't the kind of man who toyed with people's emotions. He wasn't heartless, nor was he the type to let go of something he truly wanted. And yet, he had let her go. Why? Charlotte had no answers. But she knew one thing. Her heart was shattered. The truth unfolds. A few days later, news of Sebastian's downfall spread like wildfire across every financial news outlet. The Whitmore Board of Directors had officially removed him from his position as CEO. The company publicly announced his successor, and it was not Sebastian. It was Richard Whitmore. Charlotte stood frozen, staring at the television screen, where Richard was addressing the media with an air of triumph, declaring that Whitmore Enterprises was entering a new era. And then, his next words hit her like a physical blow to the chest. "Sebastian is no longer fit to lead this company. One investment mistake was enough to prove that." Sebastian had lost everything. He had known this was coming. He had known he would lose his power, his company, his reputation. and he had known it when he chose to end their marriage. Sebastian hadn't pushed her away because he didn't love her. He had pushed her away because he thought he was protecting her, because he believed she deserved a better life, a life where he no longer existed. Charlotte's body trembled as she took a step back, her hands clenched into fists. Tears welled up in her eyes, falling in silent, uncontrollable drops. She finally understood. She wasn't angry at Sebastian for letting her go. She was angry because he had never given her a choice. Did he really think she was so fragile? Did he really think she only cared about power and wealth? Did he truly believe that she would abandon him just because he had lost his title? Charlotte didn't care if he wasn't CEO anymore. She didn't care if they had to start over from nothing. She only cared about him. Anger replaces pain. She wiped away her tears, her chest heaving as she took a deep, determined breath. "Idiot," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly from her emotions. "Who gave you the right to decide for me?" Charlotte wasn't the kind of woman who sat quietly and accepted fate. If Sebastian thought she would just walk away, obediently disappearing from his life like a mindless doll, he was wrong. He had always believed he could control everything, even her heart. But this time, it was her turn to make the decisions. She was going to find him. She was going to face him. She was going to make him admit the truth. Charlotte Sinclair had never been one to give up easily, and this time would be no different. No matter what it took, she would pull him out of the prison of loneliness he had built around himself. Because Sebastian Whitmore might have lost everything, but he still had her. Charlotte found him in a place he never thought he would be, a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of London. She couldn't believe her eyes. The man who had once embodied power and dominance, the CEO whose mere presence commanded respect, was now a shadow of himself, worn, defeated, and utterly alone. Sebastian sat on the couch, the room dimly lit, drowning in silence. His hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, his surroundings a mess. Piles of discarded documents, an empty whiskey glass from the night before, the remnants of a battle he had already lost. He had lost his company. He had lost his reputation. He had lost the woman he loved. His so-called friends and business allies had abandoned him. He had lost everything, and Charlotte could not stand it. Sebastian didn't notice her at first. He just sat there staring blankly at nothing, as if he had no reason left to move forward. Then came the sound of the door slamming open. She stepped in like a storm, fists clenched, fury radiating off her in waves. Sebastian's head lifted slowly, his dull, hollow eyes meeting hers. "Charlotte?" His voice was hoarse, most likely from drinking too much. She did not let him react. She strode toward him, standing right in front of him, trembling, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of emotions that had been bottled up for too long. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Sebastian?" Sebastian didn't answer. He simply let out a dry, bitter laugh, a laugh filled with nothing but self-loathing. "I'm just living in reality, Charlotte," he said, his voice raw, laced with cynicism. "I have nothing left. I am nothing." Charlotte's fist tightened, her knuckles turning white, her eyes burning. "You may have lost everything, but you still have me." Her voice cracked, the words cutting through the silence like blades. "Do you really think I only loved you because you were a CEO? Do you think I cared about your power, your wealth? Is that what you think of me?" Sebastian's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Charlotte took a deep breath, her voice steady but sharp. "You didn't push me away because you didn't love me. You pushed me away because you were scared I would suffer. But did you ever stop to think that the moment you let me go, that was when I suffered the most?" The room fell into complete silence. Sebastian didn't move. His hands resting on his knees slowly curled into fists. Charlotte looked at him, tears slipping down her cheeks, but her voice remained strong. "You don't get to decide for me, Sebastian." She refused to let him sink any deeper. Charlotte would not let him drown. She would not let him give up. She would drag him back whether he wanted it or not. The next morning she returned, this time with a business plan. She dropped the stack of documents onto the table in front of him, her gaze daring him to challenge her. Sebastian glanced at the papers, then up at her. "What is this?" His brow furrowed. "Did you think I'd let you sit here and rot? She crossed her arms. You were one of the best businessmen in the world, Sebastian. One failed investment doesn't define you. We're starting over. Sebastian let out a short laugh, but this time it wasn't bitter. We? He repeated, his voice quieter, as if the word meant something. Charlotte leaned forward, her hands bracing against the table, locking eyes with him. Yes, we. I'm not leaving you alone again. Sebastian felt something shift in his chest. No one had ever said that to him before. No one had ever stayed after he lost everything. But Charlotte did. She didn't need his power. She didn't need his money. She didn't need his status. She only needed him. Charlotte no longer let him hide. She pulled him out of the darkness. She took him to important meetings, introduced him to potential investors, and helped him create a new opportunity for himself. Day by day, the light in Sebastian's eyes began to return. He was no longer a defeated man. He started fighting again, not just for himself, but for the woman who had never abandoned him, even when the whole world had turned its back on him. And Sebastian realized something. He could lose his company, his reputation, and everything he had built. But he still had Charlotte, and this time, he would never lose her again. Sebastian Whitmore had once stood at the top, and he had also fallen to the bottom. But if there was one lesson he had learned from it all, it was that he had never truly been alone. This time, he wasn't alone anymore. By his side was Charlotte, the only woman who never left him when he lost everything, the only one who believed in him even when he couldn't believe in himself. She wasn't a contract. She wasn't a business deal between two families. She was his partner, his teammate, the only person he could trust completely. They started over with nothing but a small office, an old desk, and two chairs. No skyscrapers, no high-powered board meetings, no dozens of employees surrounding him, just the two of them. And that was all they needed. Charlotte wasn't weak. She didn't sit idly by while Sebastian struggled. She fought alongside him. She negotiated with investors, helped him secure new funding. She kept him focused, never letting him sink into self-doubt or fear. She pushed him forward, reminding him who he was, reminding him that he was not a failure. She looked him straight in the eyes, her gaze filled with determination. We're starting over. Sebastian looked at her, then let out a soft chuckle. We? He repeated, raising an eyebrow. Charlotte folded her arms, her confidence unwavering. Did you really think I'd let you do this alone? Sebastian couldn't describe what he was feeling at that moment. He had lost everything, but he still had her. And with her by his side, he could rebuild from nothing. 1 year later. Sebastian Whitmore was no longer a broken man. His new company, Whitmore Enterprises, had quickly reclaimed its place in the business world, becoming one of the most promising names in investment and real estate. And this time, he wasn't alone. Charlotte was not just the woman he loved. She was his greatest partner. They were no longer a forced marriage. They were a team. They stood side by side, fought side by side, and most importantly, there was no longer any reason to deny their feelings. Sebastian Whitmore never thought he would kneel before a woman, but today he was on one knee before Charlotte, in the midst of a breathtaking scene, with no contracts, no calculations, only pure, unfiltered love. This was not a business arrangement. This was a real proposal. A year ago they had divorced, walked away from each other in agonizing pain. But fate had brought them back together, and this time, Sebastian wouldn't lose her again. He had planned every detail of tonight carefully. They stood on a wind-kissed balcony, the golden sunset casting a soft glow over the endless ocean. Gentle waves lapped against the rocky shore, and in the distance, the twinkling lights from white and blue coastal homes painted a picture of unbelievable romance. Charlotte leaned against the railing, gazing up at the sky, completely unaware that Sebastian was stepping toward her from behind, a velvet box in his hand. He took a deep breath, then knelt down, his deep voice carrying through the soft evening breeze. Charlotte! She turned around, startled. And when she saw Sebastian kneeling on one knee, holding a shimmering diamond ring, she completely froze. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide, her heartbeat pounding so loudly she could hear it. Sebastian locked eyes with her, his gaze pulling her in. I once told you I would never love you. He chuckled softly, his voice husky with emotion. But you made me break every promise I ever made to myself. Charlotte bit her lip, trying to hold back tears, but they still slipped silently down her cheeks. He took another breath and continued. I don't want a marriage built on contracts. His voice was steady, sincere. I don't want conditions, negotiations, or obligations between our families. I only want one thing, a life with you. Charlotte let out a teary laugh, her heart bursting with happiness. Sebastian Whitmore, she whispered, her voice trembling. Sebastian lifted the ring higher, his eyes shining with devotion under the golden sunset. This time, will you marry me? Not for a contract, not for our families, but because you want to? Charlotte stared at him for a long moment, as if memorizing every detail of this moment forever. Then she smiled brightly, not her usual mischievous smirk, but a smile full of raw, genuine emotion. I changed my mind. She reached out, placing her hand in his. Being your wife doesn't sound so bad after all. Sebastian laughed, standing up and pulling her into his arms, kissing her deeply under the fading glow of the sun. This time, they weren't a business arrangement. This time, it was real love. Their wedding was nothing like the first one. This time, it wasn't about grandeur. It wasn't about pleasing high society figures or business elites. It was intimate, held on a private island, surrounded only by the people who truly mattered. Charlotte walked down the aisle in a stunning off-shoulder wedding dress, her eyes radiating pure happiness. Sebastian stood at the altar, no longer the cold, distant man he once was, but a man ready to give his entire life to the woman before him. As she reached him, he took her hands in his, holding on to her as if he would never let go again. They exchanged vows. This time there were no contracts, just two hearts, and a promise that would last forever. 1 year later, their greatest gift. They didn't just have each other anymore. Now they had a son. Sebastian had never imagined himself as a father, but now as he held his tiny son in his arms, this feeling was greater than any billion-dollar deal he had ever signed. The baby had Sebastian's piercing blue eyes, but Charlotte's warm, radiant smile. Charlotte watched her husband and son, laughing softly. You know, Sebastian. She gently touched their baby's tiny hand, her voice filled with love. Sebastian glanced at her, his gaze soft. Charlotte smiled. My life has had so many surprises. She chuckled, her eyes shining. But you and him, you are the greatest surprise of all. Sebastian looked at his wife and child, his heart overflowing. He had once lost everything, but now he had the whole world in his hands. Their company had flourished again, becoming one of the most powerful empires in the world. But in the end, money and power weren't what mattered most. It was this, his family. For the first time in his life, Sebastian truly knew what happiness meant. He leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to Charlotte's forehead, then whispered, I love you. Charlotte laughed, resting her head on his shoulder, as their baby slept peacefully in his arms. I know, you idiot. Because real love isn't about perfection or ideal conditions. It's about choosing to stay, to fight, and to walk through the storms together. Sebastian had once thought love was a burden, that letting go was the only way to protect the one he loved. But Charlotte had shown him that love wasn't about giving up, it was about holding on no matter what. Thank you for following this heartfelt story of. Share your thoughts about the story in the comments below. If you believe that true love can withstand all trials and sometimes begins in the simplest of ways, don't forget to hit the like button and share this story with your friends. To never miss out on touching and meaningful stories, subscribe to our channel and help us spread messages of love and warmth to everyone. Let's cherish the beautiful moments of life and love together.